Yeah.
So thank you so much, Miss Shawna, for joining us. We are excited to have you on with us today. We're talking about neurodevelopmental movement and how your work comes into place. And it's already been a joy. You guys have missed the last 15 minutes of us having great conversations. I'm really thankful that we have this record button, because we would have just carried on and had ever getting you guys connected with us. And this is so rich. It's so good stuff. So Shawna, thank you for taking some time out to share with us what you do. And we are excited to learn more about your work.
Oh, well, thank you for having me so much. It's such an honor to be able to speak with somebody who is helping so many families and doing such amazing work.
Oh, thank you so much. So a quick background, how we met was, I'm studying something called neurodevelopmental movement with an amazing teacher, Miss Betty Lamont. To be in her presence and just watch her as she observes and connects with these children is just a beautiful gift. And this has been the missing piece that we have been looking for to try to help families or individuals get the rest of the connections that they feel is missing. And so you came into our training in January, and no, not in January, in July, and we were able to hear from you, and it was so wonderful meeting you and then hearing about your work with the gut, girl. It's so important, so important. So I'm excited to hear how everything is going to blend together. So with that, I give the floor to you. Tell us about yourself.
Okay, so I started out more in the traditional medicine area, and then we adopted our first son, and that's when everything shifted, because like he was just very vulnerable. He was adopted from Bolivia, and the orphanage that he was in, they were so loving and kind. There was just a lack of resources. And so he was, pretty ill when we adopted him. Plus, he was very, very small. We don't know if he was low birth weight or if he was preemie. He was about 3 pounds when he was born.
Wow.
But I know this is TMI, but he had projectile diarrhea like I'd never seen.
Oh my goodness.
And I helped nurse in pediatrics, so I'd seen a lot of things, but this was nothing like I'd ever seen, to have just fly across the room. And so everything just moved right through him so quickly. So of course he was malnourished. And as he started to develop, once we got him, back home, and he was getting a good diet, and we were kind of figuring out what he could handle as far as like what kind of formula and things like that. Knowing what I know now, we would have went more natural, but I didn't know. And so as he was developing, he had some delays, but his issues were more health related. So he struggled with like asthma and allergies. And then later in school, he struggled with like behavioral stuff. He was a little bit more aggressive and, things like that. So he was a tricky little kiddo, but we, in desperation to try and help, because he just seemed to be getting sick all the time, I found this book by Mary Ann Block, who was this mom who was a wonderful advocate for her daughter, and then just went to school to be a DO so she could help her. And she put this center together, and I think it's in Texas, but she wrote this book called No More ADHD. And it was the first exposure that I had to like natural healthcare, or, the connection between health and academics and health and behavior and, these types of things. It was amazing. And so we started to kind of follow some of her directions, and we saw amazing results. And he just flourished. A lot of the developmental delays just kind of, disappeared. His behavioral struggles disappeared, and he was much more regulated, and then able to focus and, do all the things that he needed for school and for socialization and all that. So he was doing great. And then 9 years later, we adopted twins, and he was like a little preparation for all kinds of, oh my goodness. But they were a lot more developmental delayed. Their like behavioral struggles were way more intense. A lot of hyperactivity. They were nonverbal. And we just thought, we'll just bring them home. They were adopted from Korea. We just thought, we'll just bring them home and, all that great love and attention and good food and everything is just
what they all say. You got enough money, enough love, enough support, the kids will be fine.
Yes. And
I think that's like just when you sign on the dotted line, that's like the motto that goes with every adopted family. Bless your heart. Yeah.
And so we did all those things, still like a year and a half later, there was no speech. And, some of the behavioral stuff, like obviously I'd seen a lot of kids with ADHD and things like that, but there was nothing like this.
And how old were they when you adopted them, when you and your husband adopted?
So they were almost 2 when we adopted them.
So 2 years old, nonverbal.
Yeah, nonverbal. And they ended up being nonverbal until they were 6.5. So they needed major intervention, like the whole shebang, OT, ST, VT, all the T's and
all the alphabet.
Yes, and the clean diet and, and then we still weren't seeing a lot of improvements. So then we heard about AIT, which is auditory integration training. And we did that. Within 6 months, they were both speaking. So before that, at 6 years old, they were nonverbal. They were still in diapers. They just had such a hard time sleeping. It was really just so chaotic. And, they had no regulation. And what that looks like in real life is just like major chaos, especially when there's twins, just a lot of hyperactivity, a lot of boo-boos.
So when I hear, when I think of the families that we work with, some of the chaos will be just excited, running around, can't sleep, walking 100 miles an hour. Then I have the chaos that is, this kid is hitting his siblings and hitting me and being abusive, to this kid in chaos at school. So what does that definition look like?
So our chaos was like, they couldn't do school because they couldn't sit for 2 seconds. Like as soon as their bottom would hit the seat, they were bouncing back up again, or they were climbing up on the table. It didn't matter what was on the table. Everything that was on there was off of it. It was just, the aggression wasn't so much towards others unless they were just so beside themselves. Like, and, I would comfort them, and people would, there's a lot of judgment and criticism from moms of,
oh yes,
kids
that were my kid, he wouldn't do that. I'm like, okay, mama.
Gosh, yes. And even the practitioners would tell me, don't comfort them when they're like this. You're encouraging this bad behavior. But in my heart, I knew these kids are so sick, like something is wrong. You have to help me figure this out, but they were so focused on the behavior. We couldn't even get people to like finish testing with them. They would just write the list of diagnoses that they gathered through the years,
Hearing you say that is the most, because one of the highest parenting, I'm not going to say the name, but the parenting training that everybody's familiar with, what they teach is, Johnny, I told you to pick up your toys. Johnny, I told you to pick up your toys. Time to pick up your toys. Johnny, I've told you 3 times now. Since you're not, I'm going to move you over here. So that's isolation. And I'll get you in a few minutes and then we'll do it. So now this kid, who probably didn't hear mom say, Johnny, pick up your toys.
Yes.
So dysregulated, wasn't sure. So now, wait, mom don't want me. Mom's isolating me. And I said that in a meeting, and the girl was like, you saying it that way triggered me and reminded me of when I was a kid. So that God-given instinct of, no, don't create more space. They need more connection to their parent. And that was a saving grace for you and your children too.
I'm sure it was a help because we still had all the developmental stuff, but we didn't have a lot of detachment stuff where they didn't want me near them because, they associated me with all this negative stuff. So yes, we did a lot of cuddling. And when I asked them to do something, I knew they weren't processing it. So I would help them. So if I was asking them to pick up their toys, I was doing it hand over hand with them. And we did that for years. But I had to do it for everything: buttoning their shirt, pedaling a bike. They would be on the bike and I'd be pedaling with my hands backwards so that they could learn the feeling of it. So everything was hand over hand for them. So we knew there was so much disconnect. They just couldn't process anything. Even at 6 years old, if you ask them, where's your nose? They would just look at you like, and then run away. That constant movement, they just constantly needed that vestibular input. So they couldn't sit to eat. They couldn't sit to learn. All that changed with the AIT and then neurodevelopmental movement. So we did AIT, and within 6 months, they were speaking. The speech path came and just couldn't believe it. She'd never been able to test them, like do the formal testing, like the little flip things that they do, because they couldn't sit still and they had no speech. So receptive and expressive language was non-existent. Like they couldn't pick it up what she was saying, and they couldn't say anything until that point. And she was so excited because she thought, oh, I can do all my, tests. So she gets all her flip books out. And at the end of the evaluation, this was 6 months after the auditory training, she said, oh my goodness, they're at age level for language. There was a bunch of articulation errors because they went from, speaking nothing to words and then phrases and sentences. And they were just telling her everything, all these stories. And, they were so excited to be able to finally speak.
It was on. It was
Yeah.
there. And I think sometimes people like, well, they can't, like, it's there. The brain's working. So how do we finish these pieces so that then they can then express and get it out? So if they would have had a hearing test at the doctor's office, they probably passed due to tones and stuff picking up, right?
Yes. So if that was with the people we could even get to do the test, because most of the time they would just write non-compliant and they wouldn't do the test. So, and I kept telling the audiologists, I think they're deaf. Like they don't hear anything. How are they ever going to speak? I can't even tell you how many audiologists we went to that just totally disregarded, the fact that they had all these symptoms because of their behavior. We did finally find one audiologist, and she was completely out of the box. And she didn't care about the behavior. She knew there was something going on. So she dug a little deeper and she found a lot more information. And she did do FM trainers with them and, different therapies that we tried along the way. But AIT was the one that really gave them, it wasn't just the speech, like the vestibular part of it was connected, to the auditory system as well. So they were finally able to sit to learn. Like after we finished the therapy, that was the first time they were ever able to sit and attend to a book. And they were so interested in listening to it, where before, at bedtime, I knew they needed the input. And, the good practitioners we work with kept saying, just input nonstop. If you can't talk to them, put an audiobook on. If you don't have time for an audiobook, just make sure that they are constantly hearing speech and language. Mm-hmm. And so at bedtime, I'd go in the room and just shut the door and sit on the floor with the book. I shut the door because they'd go out of it if I so
like, no, I'm keeping you little crazies in here today. You're good. You're going to stay where you're at. I got you cornered. Mom wins.
Yes. And they were just wackadoodling around while I was reading the story. But I thought they're hearing it. Eventually it's going to sink in. Yes. So the first night after the 10-day therapy for AIT, they were able to sit on my lap and actually read a book, and they were turning the pages. They were pointing to the pictures. It was so much fun. And I thought,
as a mom, when you heard that, I mean, think of you're telling me two separate stories, two separate movies. In my mind, I'm imagining these kids all, and I love your word, wackadoodle. They were all over the place. And then literally a 180-degree shift. What was your heart when you saw that? Tell me what you experienced as a mom.
Well, I kind of thought, am I really seeing this? Like, what is happening here? But then I knew, because obviously I'd just been praying and praying that this would happen, you know, and we were looking for a miracle with that therapy, you know. It was just such a, you know, powerful thing for them. But when it first starts happening, you think, oh my gosh, is this really happening? Like, and then you're thinking, what else are we going to see? You know, and so you're just full of hope, you know, and obviously, you know, joy, but then you're a little nervous too. Like, you're just thinking, like, please don't let this be so encouraging and then slide back, you know, to all this loss, you know. So once we did AIT and we saw all this going on, there were still glitches. Like, there was still a lot of like glitches and splinter skills, you know. So, and I say splinter skills, that was just how I kind of described, like, you could see they were really advanced in this area, but in this other area, it's like, what's going on there? You know, we're still missing something, you know. And so I can't remember how I heard about neurodevelopmental movement. I think just scouring the internet. And that's what I did. Like, all day long, we were doing therapy and trying to do as much school as we could, and, you know, working with all of these different people. And then at night, it was like until 3 a.m. every night, looking for everything out there for each individual struggle they were having. And I didn't even know all of them, you know. Really, I was just focused on what I was trying to brain development, what's out there. And I found neurodevelopmental movement. Back then, it was neuro reorganization. And there was this great website where Sarge Goodchild, Betty Lamont, and Nino Junio were all answering families' questions about neuro reorganization. And oh my goodness, it was unbelievable listening to all the stories. Like, these people were just famous to me, and the families were just amazed by this work and what it was doing for their kids. And they worked with a lot of kiddos that were adopted. And I thought, okay, so there's probably some similar connections. And so I read and read and read, and then I started to find out, like, where can we go? You know, who's in our area? And Nina ended up being, and it's interesting, she was in North Carolina during that time. And that was like, I think 3 or 4 hours from us. So I thought, okay. And I just heard so many wonderful stories. Like, I needed somebody therapeutic. I didn't need some ding dong therapist that was going to be mean to my kids, you know. And I had to come to the place where I thought, my kids are hypersensitive. They will know if you like them the minute you walk in that room. And if they know you don't like them, they're not going to cooperate with anything you have to say, because they already know.
They judge the child, and then it's the child's fault.
Yes.
So many people, and they're not supposed to trust strangers.
Yes. And then
they would therapies that they pull parents out. I'm like, no. These therapies, and what you and I both do, is we pull the parents in. They cornerstone. It's not anything that we or any other specialist can do.
Yes, it's so, like, I knew that if the therapist or practitioner was therapeutic, the boys would love them. They would do anything they asked, and they would excel. And so that was part of that. I think it was called Neuro Network back a million years ago. And that's what I was looking for. I was looking for, you know, are these practitioners, how do they handle kids that aren't cooperating? You know, what do they do when these families are in desperate need and the kids are just so out of sorts, you know? And it was just wonderful what I was reading, because the kids, I could tell, loved these practitioners, all 3 of them. That's the main three that were on there. And so I thought, okay, we can do this. So we met with Nina, and she was everything that, everybody said. She was therapeutic. She understood things they were doing that nobody else did. She loved those boys so much. And every time we met with her, it was amazing. Like, she would get so excited about all of their progress, and she would literally, everybody who knew Nina, because she's passed now, they knew Nina's happy dance. And you just lived for that as a mom, that happy dance. Like, you're like, okay, we've been working so hard on this and but it changed so many things. Like, every time we went to her, she was just amazed at the progress that they made. Everything was like coming together. All those, like you said, the final piece, like it was like, okay, all this stuff's coming together. But then, like, we had obviously educational consultants, still all this stuff going on. So they were getting tested every 3 months, and they had a customized plan for their education, to meet all their needs, to try and catch them up and fill all those holes with the splinter skills. So every 3 months, we'd go in to the educational consultant, and she's doing testing too. And then we could go back to Nina and say, this is what's going on, with their academics. So probably about a year into that, they're in 3rd grade, I think, during this time, I want to say, and they tested at 8th grade reading level.
Wow.
And grade for math.
Wow.
These people that, little kiddos that nobody believed they would ever learn anything. You know what I mean? Because they couldn't react to anything that was requested of them. So basically they were just like, how are they going to? Yeah. They're not going to. It's a waste of our time to do any kind of therapy, and which was just total hoo-ha. They were amazing kiddos with just a lot of stuff causing struggles. And so, the testing, academics were improving. So this is an example of what NR did for them, or neurodevelopmental movement. So when they were very sick, when we would go to the beach, I would have to carry them both. I had a front pack and a backpack.
Oh my, makes my back hurt, girl. Ooh.
I'd have one in the front, one in the back, and then our beach bags, we would lay the blanket out and then put them on the blanket, because they could not touch the sand at all.
That's right.
If they would pull up their feet. So if you went to have, like, set them down, they would immediately and start screaming. So we knew, like, after the first time we went, okay, front, back, you put them right on the blanket. If they want to go in the water, you have to carry them to the water. So we go from that to doing neurodevelopmental movement, and we go back to the beach after doing this process for probably about, I want to say, I think it was probably about a year. Okay. And it's amazing. They just come barreling out on that sand, not a care in the world. But not only that, they were so uncoordinated before. And, like, our Nina thought that maybe they had a stroke because they didn't even move one side of their body, so to see them not only sensory wise be able to handle the beach, but then watching them, they'd grown taller and they looked so healthy, and they had a perfect cross pattern when they were. It was like,
nice. They're walking, they're integrating. It looks so good.
Yes, and anybody who does neurodevelopmental movement, when you see that cross pattern, you're thinking that is a really good functioning brain. Yep. And that's not my lane. I don't know all the connections that happen when that external sign is in place, but it was just like, oh my goodness, and in your head you're knowing, like, we would not have seen this had we not done that program. And
you're mentioning the beach, and I think of this little kid I remember seeing on the video, and she's probably 18 months old, and they're trying to put her down in the grass, and she's pulling her feet up. And as they get away from the grass, she puts her feet down. But then as they get closer, they think it's funny. Okay. It's a cute little America's Funniest Video. You won 10,000. When I look at it, I'm thinking, oh, that's not good. Our kids probably got some sensory stuff and we got some behavior issues, and that's not going to be good. But it's what you experience.
Yes, yes. And it's not just like things on their feet, like with the beach. It's like every year I had to buy the same shoes in the next size up because there were no other shoes that they would let us put on their feet, you know? So it was like, not only were their, you know, feet sensitive, but just to go to the bathroom, it was like one ear covered here, the nose pinched, one hand here to go to the bathroom. So it's like, no wonder they didn't potty train till they were 6 years old. The bathroom is so loud, you know, it's usually tile, everything's echoing. They're scared to death to flush the toilet because no telling what.
And also, will it come back and what will it do? And oh my goodness,
Yeah.
Oh my heaven above, those poor kiddos.
Yes, all of that, you know, gone between AIT and developmental movement. And then, you know, obviously they needed a lot of intervention with their
health. Y'all adopted at 2, at 6 years old. That's when they potty trained. And during that time frame, would you say, how old were they when they started AIT and then immediately neurodevelopmental movement?
So I want to say they were 6 when they did AIT, and by 6.5, that's when they were both pretty much talking. We didn't have to do anything hand over hand anymore. And then I think it was sometime within that, like just within that 6 months sometime, that we started neurodevelopmental movement and then carried it out. We ended up starting with a different practitioner, and then we moved, and then we started working with Nina, and then we did the full, you know, I think it was like 2.5 years that we worked with Nina. And then part of it, she came here too. But, you know, while we were working with Nina, there throughout that time, we were noticing a lot of biochemical imbalances too. Like we noticed, like when they ate 10 minutes later, they'd be super hyper, or they'd break out in hives from head to toe, huge hives, you know, just a lot of signs that something internal was going on as well. Their gut function would swing back and forth from constipation to diarrhea. Sorry, TMI.
No, but hey, that's the stuff that I promise you, every mama on there is like, what you talking about?
Yes, and that's another thing that nobody really was talking about. Like,
you gotta have those conversations.
Where is their gut function? So that was another, like, researching till 3 a.m. And then some of the programs that I did would set them back, and it was supposed to be recovering all of these things, but it didn't. It made them worse. So that was a lot of detective work, trying to figure out, like, you know, even with neurodevelopmental movement, you know, at the end, Nina had told us, I think they're probably going to graduate next time. Well, then she came and I had shifted their diet, and I put like this gluten-free, a couple of foods that were higher in oxalates. And when I added that, it caused a lot of fine motor issues and sensory sensitivity, and they didn't graduate. They were set back. It was really interesting. So then I was like, okay, we need to shift this again. And every time we met with Nina, she was like, you know, all this stuff you're finding out, like we found out that virus was tearing up their nerves, and that most likely was what caused inflammation in their optic nerve, which was influencing their visual function, and their auditory nerve, which was influencing their auditory function. And then, you know, when the nervous system is dysregulated, you get a lot of, you know, disconnect and again, splinter skills, where, you know, there's so many pieces coming together, but then there's still so much going on. And really that was, a lot of that was what led to me going into what I do now. because as we were meeting with Nina, we were talking about all the stuff we were finding out health-wise and things that we found out didn't work and why. And that's when she started saying, I have a lot of families that I need you to talk to and tell them the stuff that you're finding, because I think some of these families have this too. So I had told her, just send me a couple families and I'll see what I can do. And if it's a thing, and then it just like took off. But when I was counseling the families, I was just setting them up in their area. So I would talk to them and then I'd research their area and I'd find like a wellness practitioner or an AIT practitioner or something like that. Well, the wellness practitioners, they would give them like 20 minutes and then charge them a fortune, and they had no direction. And I thought, this is not going to help anybody I send. These kids are complex. Like, they need a lot of time invested to figure out what their puzzle pieces are so you can start putting them all together. And so that's what led me into FDN. Was I just thought, I'm going to do this myself. I have this knowledge. I just need the credentials to be able to do it, to get the testing we need, to get the, find the missing pieces and the resources. And so as I did that, then Betty Lamont heard, and people started to send me more families. And so as I was, working with the families, I just thought, I need more. I want all the education. I'm constantly looking into things like that I can get educated on to help the families, that would help them with their biochemistry or, energetic or support, or, just even with, their neurotransmitters. Things like that, like just adding all of the information I can to help the families as much as I can, plug in as many of those puzzle pieces. So one of the big things that Nina really loved that I researched enormously was the genetic information and finding genetic mutations.
Because I noticed you have under your certifications, just so everyone knows, you have your FDN, which stands for
Functional Diagnostic Nutritional Practitioner.
And then you have additional training in methylation and biochemistry, bioenergetic work, AIT, and then HTMA. And so we talked about the AIT, but definitely discuss some more about the biochemistry methylation, because what does that mean if we hear that?
Yes. So it's basically, what I needed was training and certification in looking at the genetic mutations and finding out if they're expressing using functional testing, and then learning how to bypass them. So in the twins case, I did learn that, but it was all like research that I did on my own, combining several brilliant practitioners' information. Not one practitioner had all the answers. It was I prayed for that so hard. I would just find one person that could fix it all for me. And I just could not them. And, that again is probably my desperate attempt to get as much training as I can. But, the genetic piece for my boys was huge, and a specific way of helping them to methylate or, clear toxins, support their immune system, their nervous system. Why were they getting all these infections and holding them in their body? And why were they causing all this nerve damage? And how can we clear this off, so that their nerves can heal and, their bodies can heal because of it. So the biochemistry and methylation, that was a really important piece, just because it helped me, with all the other research that I had done, start putting the puzzle pieces together with methylation. And it basically all of the mutations, like a lot of times you hear about MTHFR, that there's two that are most researched. researched and, but that's where kind of people stop. And there's so much more to look at other than that. There's genetic mutations for neurotransmitters, for the immune system, for even, being able to create enough bile in the body, which is a huge factor if your
be able to
gut's
digest your food so that
yes,
when you get the nutrients and you don't have trouble with the constipation or the diarrhea.
yes,
Yes.
yes. And then even snatching up toxins and clearing them out so they don't build and congest the liver. All of those things can be traced back to genetic mutations. So the training that I loved combining was being able to do the functional test, because someone can have all these genetic mutations but not really be expressing any of them.
Right.
In most of the families I work with, they're expressing, but not in every area, so looking at the functional testing helps us pinpoint, okay, this is expressing, we can bypass this. We can clear this mess up, bypass it through supplementation or avoiding. In kids, that's great. But when you look at genetic mutations for kids, you can make a plan in place that helps them into adulthood. So if a kiddo has all these glitches in their detox pathways, they definitely don't want to choose a job where they're exposed to toxic chemicals, because they won't be able to deal with them. So even if you're bypassing them, eventually it's going to overcome them. And then they're going to
think about what we breathe in, what we get on our skin, what's in our home, what's in our environment, where you live. What do you swim in a lake that was drowned and created for, Duke Energy, all of that affect us in our body and our behaviors. And you mentioned neurotransmitters. A lot of people talk about the serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine, the GABA, all that stuff, and let everybody know, where is that created in the body? Is it in the brain?
Right. And that's the tricky thing too with the gut, and what is created even for the thyroid. They say so much of the conversion to active thyroid hormone happens in the gut and in the liver. So if it's all backed up, it's going to cause a lot of trouble. When there's stuff in the gut, it causes so much stress in the body. Most people are very resilient. We're resilient to stress. It's these things internally that cause more stress, and then it makes us less resilient to the normal stressors, especially kids.
Why they say stress kills.
Yes.
Stress is the inflammation, and we have, whether it's perceived or real stress, whatever's happening, we may look fine on the outside, but the inside of our body, we don't know what's going on.
Yes.
So many issues that we just don't think of. What is HTMA?
Oh, that's hair tissue mineral analysis. I love that training. So most of the time when people do mineral testing, they'll test like a fluid, a body fluid, but that really doesn't tell you what you're able to absorb into your cells and tissue. So that test is an amazing test to investigate, because you can see, is there any toxic metal buildup? Are any of the major nutrient minerals deficient? Are any dumping into the tissue? Some of these things, like in calcium, magnesium. With magnesium, you can dump that like crazy if you're under a ton of stress or if the body's in an alarm state. Calcium and magnesium can both be dumped if there's a lot of heavy metal toxicity. But calcium and magnesium in a ratio tell us blood sugar information. So if you have a little kiddo who's got all this going on, their body's stressed, they're dumping a bunch of magnesium, they're also going to probably want to eat almost every second because their blood sugar is just going to keep dumping. So, those things are really nice to look at because it's such an easy, support that you can do. You don't even have to give them a supplement. You do a magnesium bath or magnesium spray. Not only does it calm the whole central nervous system, but it also will, prevent that imbalance with calcium, magnesium, and balance blood sugar. So that is just super fun to look at. sometimes all of them deficient because there's so much going on in the gut. So if they have, a huge imbalance in their microflora, they're really going to struggle. If there, is more imbalance, or if there's things that form like a tuber barrier, then they're going to be deficient in a lot of those major nutrient minerals. We can also look for like if they're losing a lot of zinc. Everybody is very focused on zinc right now with COVID and everything. And you can be dumping your zinc into your hair and your urine very easily. Copper will antagonize it. So if the person is in a colder state and they have copper piping, it'll be, causing the dumping of zinc.
We don't think about our house and what our house is built with, how that affects. And
yes, and sometimes we have the PVC piping, but the pipe coming to the house is copper. So it's really tricky, all of that stuff. And it can have a huge impact because, a lot of times the copper will magnet in a yeast overgrowth. So if there's any, genetic mutations where their microbes are going to use copper as a biofilm, you'll have hidden copper toxicity as well as pathogen overgrowth underneath, so the immune system can't detect it. So that's a really great test, to look at that. It shows adrenal function, thyroid function, all in the ratios of the major nutrient minerals. So that is
people, I can hear everybody saying now, wait, copper piping, how old's my house? So, well, no, I live in a new house, so I don't have any of these issues. However, brand new homes carry their own host of struggles. So speak to even some of that, because people don't realize all that goes inside a new home as far as smells and chemicals.
Yes. And that is I have a story to attach to it, and I didn't have the knowledge then, but we were military for over 20 years. So we moved around a lot, and thank goodness, after this move, my husband retired because the twins needed so much more support than if we were moving around. But we bought a brand new house, and we were coming for like the final walkthrough. And there wasn't anything in the house, but they had just finished like the carpet, the paint, and within probably a half an hour to an hour of looking around at the house, with the person from the builder, both the twins were just screaming, laying on the floor, just completely not able to function. And now I know, like, I must have had a sense of it too, because I remember we went to what was it, Warwick? They had those little air filters, and so I got a couple and put them in there because we could smell, some of the toxicity. But looking back, like the carpet was gassing off, the paint was gassing off. It wasn't no VOC paint; it was cheap construction grade paint, that they know everybody's going to paint over, it was for all of the glues holding the cabinetry together and the countertops together and the flooring together. All those glues have formaldehyde and other solvents. The home and work environment can be loaded, even if it's brand new. Like in older places, you have to worry about mold and mycotoxins. In the newer places, you have to worry about all of this gas off, and some of those paints can gas off, they say 5 to 10 years.
It's
so
interesting you said it's that cheap paint one that they know everybody's going to paint over. Well, guess what? Still not removing the problem. You're actually reigniting it again with new paint.
Yes. And you definitely want to use no VOC paint when you do cover it up. But I had no idea back then. But another thing I didn't realize is when we're exposed to something through the nose, it's in our bloodstream in 30 seconds. It has a huge impact on our health. And then when something gets on our skin, it's in the bloodstream in 30 minutes. That's what I've read in research. So
I'll totally look at a candle differently then, because I love to smell candles.
Yes. All of those things can really cause a lot of toxicity, and those toxins in a person that cannot clear them will get stuck in their detox pathways and then start backing everything else up. So it's just really a nightmare for many people. And then it can influence them neurologically, and it's an exposure. It's not something that, is a part of them. Like, it's not that they're neurologically impaired. It's that they've had this exposure. They've had an insult to the body and they just weren't able to clear it. So that is just, it's amazing, that information. The toxin exposure is huge nowadays, not just with, gas offs and these solvents and chemicals, but also with the EMF exposure, and now with 5G rolling out, it's really hard on some people because it downregulates the immune system and, can cause a lot of neurological, dysregulation. So
is it
there's
safe
a
to
lot.
say that even like kids who were given tech time at such an early age,
Oh, yeah, it's
only
tricky.
affecting the addiction part of the brain, but now you've got all of that to factor as well.
Yes. And, even if they don't have a device in their hands, typically the typical house is surrounded by at least 20 different cell towers, and they're all just blanketing us with the EMF. We don't even know the full effects of that, because it's all new, these types of things. So but they definitely, in a kiddo that's already vulnerable, can have a huge impact. In an adult who's struggling with their health and wellness, it can have a big impact. There's tons of ways around that, with different devices that help, with frequencies and things like that. But most people don't even know about that, so it's really tricky. And, these things are created to draw the kids in a lot of times. So, they get that hit of dopamine and then but some of them, to be honest, when I work with young adults, it's amazing because it just floods you with compassion because they're able to tell you what's going on. And sometimes they will say that is the only time they feel good. Their body is so uncomfortable that short screen time is the only time that they can let all that other stuff go and kind of relax. And then you have such a new, mindset about that. Like, they need that. That's therapeutic to them, So at that point, it's just like, okay, let's get a wearable that protects you so that you can have that, relief sometime. But yeah, so there's so many different things that happen, like when there's imbalance in the body, digestive imbalance. Obviously, all of this can influence behavior, speech and language. The sensory system gets dysregulated with these things. Focus and attention, even aggression,
Yes.
Major aggression. There's always something going on internally. Sometimes it's really stealthy. Sometimes it's super simple, like a food sensitivity. If you have a kiddo that wants to rip everybody's face off and he's allergic to eggs and he has 8 eggs every morning for breakfast, you could see how that would just lead him right down the wrong path every day, so it's really, it can be something so simple or something, like I said, more stealthy, but they can lead to learning challenges, sometimes even like if they've had trauma, then they have a lot of illness or, pathogen overload and imbalances, they're not able to process the trauma as well because all that stuff is kind of holding them back. So it's nice when you can bring balance back to the biochemistry, because then you can see them being able to process trauma and work with their therapist so much easier, like things start coming together for them in that area too, which is wonderful. And then obviously peaceful.
A lot of kids that we work with, their brain is going, I always think of the Wheel of Fortune wheel. It's going so incredibly fast, and we're throwing all these different therapies and ideas at them. Traditional therapies are aimed at more compliance and behavioral. And it's still spinning really, really, really fast. So when we come in and we're able to peel back some layers, slows the wheel down so that then as you're talking, like you say, through the trauma, but they can't because that brain and that is going so fast, their body's 100 miles an hour, that they hear what you're saying, but they don't hear what you're saying.
Yes.
I see that. That's a visual that I use. And I think of when you were describing that, that wheel has almost completely just stopped so that they can enter that area that they've been running from for so long.
That's amazing. That is such an amazing way of looking at it. It totally makes sense. That is probably exactly what's going on. You know, everything is so hard, you know, when the body is imbalanced, you know, just, you know, the day to day, you know, some of the families, you know, that I work with, the kids have struggles with even personal care, you know.
Yes.
So even the simplest, you know, things like eating, you know, and knowing when to eat, or, you know, being able to tell when they're hungry, when they're thirsty, you know, even those things can be influenced because that meal is spinning too fast. They just can't even, you know, it's just like a blur, the things that they're, you know, struggling with and trying to help it, you know, they can't, I feel like sometimes they can't even remember some of the
I don't
tools.
think they need to. Like I've had conversations with teachers and even some parents when they're talking about the kids and behaviors, and I'll ask a teacher like, well, what do you think? Like, oh, well, I just believe they can give me more effort. They're just not trying hard enough.
Yeah.
That is a fact, or is that your perception?
I like that.
So it's helping them realize, no, this kid really is trying his best. Let me show you how he is trying. So it's helping the adults take that judgmental lens off, doctors, of the checkbox mentality, and say, let me know this kid. Let me get to know him. Where's he at?
Yes.
And until you do that, we're actually setting the kid up for failure. He's never going to get better, and he's going to be frustrated the rest of his life.
Yeah, that is so true. I could totally see that.
But there's so some of the things you had mentioned, brain fog, raging, absolutely. Even the hormonal imbalance, because we have girls who are flourishing very young.
Yes.
World and guys, especially when you have all these not behaviors, but the struggles that they're going through, and then hit puberty, that just like sets the atomic bomb off.
Yes.
Like the kids,
especially nowadays, like they're getting so much access to false estrogens. You know, if you look at like the typical food off the shelf, it's loaded with soy. You know, that is such a false estrogen. So, you know, so many of the young boys have breast buds, and it's because they're getting way too much estrogen, and then their livers are congested and they're recycling it over and over. And even for, you know, the young girls, they're getting too much estrogen. So their cycles are very heavy and they're so dysregulated that they can't hold it together for PMS. Like it's just a terrible PMS.
Well, and then they have terrible PMS, so parents take them to the doctor put them on birth control so much earlier to handle the cycle, when in reality, if we would just work on that issue, we wouldn't need birth control, which can lead to other issues as they occur.
Yes, and that's where the FDN comes in, where you're looking for the root causes of struggles. You're looking at, you know, as many pieces of the puzzle so that you can figure out how to bring balance back to all the different systems of the body, you know, and finding out, you know, what caused the imbalance at the root level, you know, and then putting a plan together that's custom for that person, you know, to get things back on track. But even for, you know, adult women, you know, it's so sad. If you have a heavy cycle and it doesn't improve, you know, they're going to ablate your uterus, like they're going to set it on fire. And that is just like, oh my gosh,
It's invasive.
before you do that, let's try this, because it could just be, one of the things I find when things are really heavy around the cycle is mold exposure. And their liver gets really congested. They're not able to detox like used estrogen, and it just builds and builds. And all that estrogen causes abnormal cell growth and very heavy cycles, or they'll just lose them completely. So again, if that same person going to traditional, many of them won't dig. The good ones, they'll dig. They want to know a little bit more before they just, prescribe something. But typically, the pill is the first, go-to. And that has a whole nother slew of side effects, especially when there's imbalance in the body.
Yeah, and they're so young there, and it takes several years for a young lady to find her cycle anyway. The
Yes.
first is trying to find that balance. How does her body work? It's trying to go through that change anyway. So when you don't allow it that space to kind of work through it, and you're automatically throwing on birth control, that shifts things, as well as, oh, well, now I have acne, so I'm going to go take a pill for acne. No, everything is not birth control fixable. But unfortunately, we have a generation of kids, females, that's easy. So now we have fertility issues, and we have other health issues.
Yes.
Get older.
Yes. And a lot of times that's just because the root causes weren't found, and they're still there. So they may have regulated the symptoms with the pill, but the root cause is still there, and it's letting other stuff in, and making that person more vulnerable. And that's, kind of the difference between me and traditional medicine. In traditional medicine, obviously I'm not replacing that, but supporting it. That's the goal, is how can we support whatever's going on, but then still get to the root issues. So in hopes that whatever medication they may have had to give you before, you might not need it once we clear out the root causes, and when you find the root cause in using the approach that I use, it's a drug-free, so you're not adding more symptoms or side effects, to what you're working on. So you can really see, is it working? Is it bringing balance? But the most amazing thing is you can find the hidden stressors on the body, through using functional testing, to see, is there infection? Is there toxicity? What do their hormones look like? Like, why would I give them some hormone disruptor if I've not even looked at them? Because most of these hidden stressors will cause so much stress in the body that it'll influence their sex hormones, because their body is more focused on producing stress hormones. And when that happens, there's just it's like a ripple in a pond that somebody just, threw a rock in. It just starts to spread out and cause metabolic chaos in the body, and make them more vulnerable, like I said, to other things. In the testing, it's so nice because all of the functional labs, like all of this, it's like a total self-care model. So basically, I'm just educating them through the process using all this functional testing that tells a ton of information about what's going on. And it's super helpful to get to that root cause, that hidden stressor, and usually just by even talking to them. Like, when you go to a traditional doctor, I feel like they really have to get a lot of people in and out, and so
it's a for-profit company. We don't want to see doctors in hospitals that way. They are a for-profit company. None of them are nonprofits.
Yes. Yeah.
They have to look at it that way. How quick can we get people in? How many more can we see? What does insurance need for us to check off? That being said, girl, my heart hurts. I'm calling 911 and I'm going to the hospital.
Yes.
So we are not anti-doctors at all.
No, not
their specialty, and we work with people. It's we're missing that functional piece.
Yes.
The whole body, not just one strain or one area.
Yes, yes. And I think there's such a disconnect too when they even you have a regular doctor, your general practitioner doing testing, and then they see something's off and they say, okay, now you need to see the rheumatologist or the endocrinologist, or and they start putting you in all these other directions, and none of them are talking to each other,
Sometimes
so
working against each other. Primary care doesn't want to do what the doctor says. I'm like, whoa, whoa, whoa. I thought y'all were supposed to be on the same team here.
yes, and that can cause a lot of trouble. The goal with functional diagnostic nutrition is to find all that information and pull as much of it together as you can, and then adding other training so that you can, build even more off of that. That has been super helpful, because the more pieces you get to their puzzle, the more balance you'll be able to bring to the body. And then they won't need traditional care as much usually. Usually then, they bring balance, everything is going in the right direction, and everybody's happy.
And you teach the kids and the adults to say, hey, I feel something's off in my body. I'm noticing something. I'm not what's your regulator? Oh, I'm noticing this behavior. What changed? What shifted? You began to become, they are already wonderful detectives of their children. Even if adults, okay, you still brought this child into your home and you're 24 hours, 7 days a week. You know better than any doctor or and so it's putting a lot more power back in the parental seat where it belongs, to say, look, use your voice, we'll speak up. If you know something ain't right, let's keep digging.
Yes, that is so true. That is so true. And so many of the families through that self-care where I'm kind of guiding them through, educating them with the testing and the connections between what we find and the behaviors or health struggles, they start to pick it up along the way. So then when the kiddos or, the person we're working with goes into maintenance, they know exactly if something comes back into the mix, an old symptom, that crops back up, they know, okay, this is what we do, and then it goes away, so that they can maintain, their balance.
I love that balance. It's so beautiful. Think about all the tests. There's obviously 1,000 tests. So you work collectively with the doctor on some of these testings, correct?
Yeah, some of them. If they are already working with the doctor, a lot of times they'll say, take these tests to the doctor, see if there's anything they want to do. If you would rather use the natural, method of clearing it up, that's where I would come in. But most of the time their goal is to use a more natural approach anyways. And it's very effective. Sometimes we'll retest just to make sure we cleared everything up. But the tests are really amazing. Like, I think people get scared, like, oh, I'm going to do this testing and you're not going to find anything. But there's always an explanation. It's shocking. We can find it.
Because they've been to so many doctors and they don't find anything. And if you look at even just, again, I'm thankful for all of them. I'm not in any way being negative. It's how our system of care works. And let's change the values of what's considered out of normal range now, because so many people are becoming this that we need to kind of change it. Or no, they really can function. So what's considered normal and not normal anymore? Nobody knows, and people are exhausted, and they feel like, the doctors will look at them like they're crazy. They're like, I know something's not right in my body. Something's not right. Well, everything's testing normal. I'm just telling you, something's not right.
Yes. I love finding that, in that person that's had part of their colon removed and nobody ever did a stool test. I love looking at that and saying, oh my goodness, look at this, and finding, all of the things that triggered that imbalance and then the fallout from it, finding the root cause and then finding all the imbalances. And the nice thing is you can use a lot of these tests. They're not the root cause, but when we are able to get that information, we can start putting in supports until we get the root cause cleared up and we don't need the support anymore. You know, some of the supports are in place to bypass genetics, and that's how they stay in maintenance, you know. But they don't usually need as much of that support once we get to the root causes. You know, sometimes we'll think we found the root cause, but then we find out it was something even more stealthy than we thought, you know. Sometimes we're working on things and they get COVID. That, you know what I mean? Like you have going great and then they get COVID and it's like, oh man. And some of them still do great and some of them, it really sets them back. So then we have to, you know, figure out, okay, let's support them, let's get going, we'll get them back in the right direction. But a lot of those tests, you know, reveal that, you know, it's amazing what you can look for in the testing nowadays. In the functional testing, it's just amazing. There's so much available to really find out, you know, what the, and so much of it is missed. Some of it you can have your traditional doctor do it, but they usually don't want to do like the full panel, but you can definitely ask them for it. So sometimes I'll say, okay, let's get a thyroid panel. You can have your, you know, general practitioner run this for you, but make sure they run all of it, not just a TSH, get the whole picture, you know, and then they don't have to pay out of pocket for it, you know, but they still get all the information they need. Some women I've worked with have been on thyroid medication for 20 years and they've never tested to see if they have autoimmune thyroid. They don't test their antibodies. They're on thyroid medication all this time. They had no idea, you know, that they're sensitive to something that's triggering an autoimmune response. So those are always really, you know, nice to find, you know. So the testing is super helpful. You know, it gives us really clear information. People are always shocked at what it picks up. And, you know, when you support it, improvements, you know, are pretty common. So that is just wonderful. But a lot of times in that we find pathogens, we find food sensitivities. Some of the things some people aren't talking about are oxalates, which is like a natural pesticide in certain foods that, like if a pest eats it, it shreds their mouth. But in people, when they aren't able to clear it from the body, it will shred soft tissue, even the gut. So a lot of the diets nowadays are really high in like kale and spinach and almond. Everybody's cooking with almond, having almond in their bread, you know, almond milk, almond everything. And if they can't clear oxalates, it will bind to calcium, form a crystal, and just shred the soft tissue. It gets embedded in your bones, and they found it in bone marrow, in the brain, in lung tissue. You know, it can cause a lot of problems. In little ones, it can actually steal their speech and language. It can steal their fine motor skills, the ability to socialize appropriately, just a ton of different problems. Salicylate is another thing you don't hear a whole lot about. You know, that can really influence mood and behavior, and some research, they've linked it to symptoms of fibromyalgia. So it can be also something that causes a lot of havoc in the body if you're sensitive. But also, you know, if you're loaded with infection and there's a lot of bacteria, it can convert some of the amino acid into salicylate. So again, looking for that root cause, if it's bacterial and you can clear that up, then they might not be producing a bunch of salicylate, and then the sensitivity will go down, which then they could add it back in the diet. It's no big deal, you know, and then they're still able to stay well. So some of
the latest trend, the latest food diet's not always the best for every individual person.
No.
Works for you. Market 101, that's not going to be very happy, I know, because we need to make money off of what's popular right now. Figure out how does it work for your body.
Yes, a customized approach is like always the best. There's a lot of one size fits all diets out there, but you know, if you have really high glutamate, it's a neurotoxin. So if you're doing a bunch of bone broth, you're probably going to have some problems. You know, if you're eating a bunch of fermented food, which is a really popular thing for the gut right now, But if you have histamine and glutamate issues, you're going to have trouble with it. And again, that's like the detective work that goes into, when the thing that's supposed to fix everything causes more trouble, figuring out why would that happen? Some people are genetically vulnerable to histamine and glutamate, and you can see that in the genetic testing.
There's a little kiddo, and not working with him, but I know of his story, and he has to get allergy shots a couple times a week.
Oh.
He will break out into major rashes, like head to toe. Now that they are doing the shots, it kind of keeps it at bay. So when I hear histamine, I imagine what's in his little gut right now.
Yes.
Wide open, funny, witty, but wide open.
So that's usually histamine.
So it's a histamine thing, yeah, which is so that could be removed from his body, and then he wouldn't have the need for all those shots.
Yes, and then
balanced.
Sometimes the histamine is driven up by infection. So Morganella is something that builds a lot of histamine in the gut. So sometimes it's a combination of, genetically he's not able to clear histamine, but then also there's infection that's driving the histamine up. And then if he's eating a lot of high histamine foods, you can see it's just a recipe for disaster. Sometimes, when there's big skin hives like that, it can be mold exposure. Sometimes it's as simple as the clothes were in the washer too long, or the washer has mold in it, or the washer dryer are in a basement and the clothes are sitting on top of the dryer after they've been cleaned for a while in the basement before they're brought up to the. So there's a lot of different, ways you can get access to mold on the skin. And then before you know it, you're having this huge reaction, sometimes it's
you're breathing it in, then guess what? It's in your bloodstream. Right?
Yes. And then it's on your skin, it's in your bloodstream. It can actually colonize in the mucosa of the microbiome. So you can get it colonized in the paranasal sinus cavity, all the mucosa, and it just irritates the body, down regulates the immune system, and then also influences neurological function, kidney function. And in some cases, mold exposures they've linked things like ochratoxin to Parkinson's and Alzheimer's. So, even just those things, can make a big difference for a little kiddo, as he's growing up. You want to get rid of that quick. Sometimes the skin stuff can happen because their detox system isn't working, and there's things in the gut that you're seeing through the skin. They're detoxing through the skin. So a lot of times that is in combination with the congested liver. Like they've had exposure to toxicity or mold, they can't detox, and then they have all these pathogens that are in the gut, and then you're seeing it come on the outside. Kind of like yeast, if you see like what looks like a ringworm rash, or, mold on or fungal overgrowth on the nails, in the nail beds, all of those things can be a sign of an internal overgrowth that's so, it's enormous, and it's coming outside of the body.
We don't think about all these pieces. Instead, we go to the dermatologist. gives us an antibiotic that then kills our gut flora because it's just stripped it, and just keeps the cycle continuing.
Yes.
What we know to do.
Yes, and that whole gut brain connection.
It's like the second brain. Yes. Yes.
But even just like knowing the largest nerve in the body connects the gut to the brain, that's huge. But then like the gut influences the endocrine system, the immune system, all of the neurotransmitters, your thyroid, like all these conversions happen, a lot of them in the gut and the liver. Just there's so many links in research, between, the gut health and mood disorders, very severe. And with stealthy infection, the struggles around psychological health, it's really intense for many people. But the hormones get so out of whack when there's pathogens in the gut and balancing everything because there's stress in the body. It's a hidden stressor, and your body will start producing more stress hormones than sex hormones. So, in the neurotransmitters, when you think about serotonin, the calming, feel good, happy go lucky neurotransmitter can be really low if it's not converting or if there's bacteria covering receptors. But then a lot of times there's an excess of dopamine when the gut is compromised and there's sensitivity to something like egg, you'll always see dopamine and histamine really high. Or if there's a mold exposure, you'll see dopamine high. And dopamine in the right amount is great. Like that gives us that, reward seeking behavior that we look for to get projects done and meet deadlines and things like that. But if you have high dopamine, a lot of times it's the reverse of that, where you're almost addicted to certain things. So repetitive behaviors start to happen. It's harder to put
OCD starts to come in. I need to flip the room light 10 times before I can leave.
Yes.
So much psychological as it is what's going on in your neurotransmitters in your gut.
Yes. So if your serotonin's low and the dopamine's high, it's really going to influence your mood. There's usually a lot more irritability. But then if you add histamine to that, people don't realize histamine is a neurotransmitter, but it's not calming. It's irritating,
I heard you say histamine foods. What would be considered a high histamine food?
So a high histamine food would be something like something fermented or smoked or cured. Those are really high in histamine. Citrus is very high in histamine. So imagine this. This is a good picture. So imagine a kiddo going to school. He has focus and attention problems, and every once in a while he'll take a whack at one of his fellow classmates. And every morning he has orange juice, eggs, toast. Sometimes he has cereal that has something with gluten and dairy in it. So
like a Frosted Flake type cereal, not one of those healthy.
Yes. And even some of the healthy cereals have gluten. If you're gluten sensitive and dairy sensitive and you have high histamine, you're going to school in a flare, totally in a flare. Like your whole body is an alarm state. And so paying attention, like he's going to have a heightened response to everything. Unless it's really interesting too, like the difference between kids and adults. Like an adult in that same situation will literally want to lay down after they eat that. Like they just get so tired and exhausted.
Brain fog, like good night, see ya.
Yes, just like Dory trying to push themselves through the day, just keep swimming kind of thing. Where the kids, they just a lot of times are 100 miles an hour, wide open, and they're just hitting everything along the way, you know what I mean? Or they're just not able to pick up what the teachers are teaching them. They're so distracted by every sound because their sensory system's really sensitive, So that is
ADHD diagnosis or a high level autism functioning diagnosis or something along that.
And then add to that a high glutamate, which is a neurotoxin. It kind of excites the cells, to death. Add that in the mix, and then you'll have tics. You'll have repetitive thought loops, whether they're good or bad, and sometimes aggression and rages. So
no, that's from food sensitivities.
That could be, yes, or infection and balancing the neurotransmitters.
Yeah.
Infection, food sensitivities, genetic expression, all of those things combined. But in just shifting the breakfast, and starting the day with lower histamine and lower glutamate, that can really make a difference. But glutamate is on a seesaw with GABA. So if the glutamate comes up, GABA drops down, and GABA is super calming.
GABA is one of my favorite neurotransmitters. When I hear people talk to them, like when you're under high stress,
yes,
in the brain. So people who are looking for that alcohol effect, it's not that they're trying to get drunk. It's I need to cool. I need to settle down.
Yeah.
So they have
Yeah.
that glass of wine, have that 12-ounce beer, and they're trying to settle. And it's,
Yes.
which I know we need to do all those things. So I'm like, dude, adding GABA at night will make a big difference in your children.
Oh, yes.
Sleep compared
Yeah.
to nothing. And then you can dig deeper into what you're doing, what's out of balance.
Yes. And the interesting thing is they'll be looking for the calm in the alcohol, but alcohol, if it's fermented,
Mhm.
you know, it's high in glutamate.
Just-
Most
oh
of the
my
time,
goodness.
there's so much. So they're just repeating that
Wow.
loop. So their glutamate continues to get high, their GABA continues to drop, and then they have more of a drive to alcohol, more of a drive to that
Wow.
fermented. You know what I mean? It's just,
Yeah.
and then the histamine's up. They don't feel good, you know,
No.
like, but it does give them a little bit of peace, you know, so that'll drive it back. And then it just continues to feed that loop.
Vicious
So the testing is what reveals it, which is so nice because you can see it all laid out in front of you, you know, and then you can start putting the pieces together. Like, do you drink alcohol? Do you drink bone broth? Do you eat a bunch of fermented foods? You know, do you eat, or one of the things looking at food sensitivity is that they have high dopamine and histamine to see if they are sensitive to egg. A lot of times when they are, infection will drive that sensitivity. So if you can clear that, then usually they're not as sensitive to egg.
Now, is that an egg that's at the grocery store or an egg that I've got some chickens in my backyard that's eating natural?
That's a great idea. That mindset is perfect.
Mhm.
So, and that you can definitely test that, you know, in how you feel, you know, to the difference between the two.
Yeah.
Typically, you know, the regular old egg off the shelf will
Mhm.
cause a lot more than just the sensitivity, where the more free-range organic eggs, you wouldn't be experiencing the sensitivity, but it might still be driving up a flare.
So I
So
haven't checked.
trial and error, and then looking at the testing is probably the best. Yeah. But yeah,
Interesting. I
that's
never would
just,
have thought eggs.
yes. Sometimes it's like really hard because it's gluten, dairy, and egg. And, you know, the more things you add like that, the harder it is to eliminate that. So sometimes we'll put it on a rotation, then clear the imbalances, and then redo the test and see if they're still sensitive. And sometimes they're not, you know, sometimes they're able to have it every once in a while and it doesn't cause as much of a flare because it's not every day.
Wow. So it's not, you know, a lot of times people, we look at just the food, or we look at just the stress, or we look at just the drinks, or we look at just the environment. And you have to take all these pieces. And looking back with your kiddos, the journey all the way up, how old are they today?
They're 19.
Wow. So it has been 13 years since you started this journey. Okay. And how are they doing today?
They're doing so good. First of all, they're so calm.
Yeah.
It always shocks me how chilled out they are, and they're learning. Like, you know, we had to hire a tutor for math because their math skills are way above mine. Like they're just super smart kiddos, but because of all the struggles they had, they're also very humble and compassionate and you know, thoughtful. They're really amazing, but then they're super funny too, you know, like that was something that we learned with their neurodevelopmental movement program was, you know, we were trying to get so focused on function, we forgot that they have little characters in there, like their personalities, you know. That wasn't something, that was just like an extra treasure that we got out of neurodevelopmental movement that we didn't even think about. But the one twin, he has the funniest sense of humor and he jokes around all the time. You know, he's just hilarious. The other twin was very quiet. And he has kind of a dark humor, which is even more shocking and hilarious. So we're always like, oh, you know, these kids are really just amazing kiddos. I call them kids, but now they're like young men, but you always think of them as kiddos, I guess.
They'll always be your kids, but they can vote. I mean, just think about, they're able to live.
Oh, they can drive, they can, they can go to college, you know, all these things we
Yeah.
didn't know that was possible. And it's absolutely possible.
And if you hadn't started this journey, Shawna, there's no telling how your life
Yeah.
is so different today. And
Yeah.
the kids would be in such a different space.
Yes. And so much of the research, you know, it was out there, but they say it's like 40 years for people to really embrace it, you know.
Yeah.
So like if you would research the gut brain connection years ago, you wouldn't have found anything from like Harvard or the acceptable, you know, resources for traditional medicine. Now you find it, you know, John Hopkins has stuff on the gut brain. They're
Dr.
trying to
Hyman, all those guys are so good. And that's more functional, more conversation. And it's not, you don't look, doctors don't look at you like you have 3 heads when you mention that. Not completely stupid. What's going on with poop? Let's normalize talking about poop.
It's normal to talk about poop.
It's part of it. We're moms. How's your poop? Did you poop today?
What did it look like?
What color was it? Was it hard? Was it easy?
I know that's such a conversation that I have so often with people. And I'm like, I'm so sorry. You know, I talk about poop all day. To me, it's no big deal, but to other people, it might be inappropriate. But you can get
that's where it comes from. Like, that is our main area. Such an important area.
It is. It is such an
not talked about.
It is just such a loop too, because, you know, mental and emotional stress will contribute to gut dysfunction, and gut dysfunction can contribute to mental and emotional stress. You know, they both kind of feed into each other, you know, but when you're calming all that down, then you can really get moving in the right direction. You know, when you're calming the mental and emotional, you know, and a lot of times that's with external supports through therapy and things like that, you know, or neurodevelopmental movement. That input to me is external, but it's helping at such a massive internal.
Yes, and I know she wouldn't mind me telling, but the kiddo I was sharing with you earlier, who adopted 2 kiddos from China, and they started some of the fetal patterns with the neurodevelopmental movement, and in 2 weeks, she texts and says, "Can it work this fast? I'm seeing results. Is this right?" Because there is connection in our body. There's connection in safety when we put the pieces together. And so we're not weird.
We're not weird.
Completely. It works.
It totally works. And
it works.
It's a big thing. You see improvement, you know, with neurodevelopmental movement, you see improvement not only in behavior, but their ability to learn and attend and to socialize. And even in the structure of their body, it shifts. They get stronger. You know, that
quirkiness is going away. They're able to, and Betty says it so well, the upper part of our body, we embrace life. This is our emotions. This is where we feel. Our bottom half is where we get our footing in the world. And so many kids don't have their feet underneath them. They're not grounded. They're operating from all up here and from the body first, not the head first. And so when you see those little pieces start to come together and the kid walks in the room like, "Hey, I own this place," you're like, "Yes, awesome. Love it."
Yeah.
Love it.
That is awesome. And I love supporting you guys and your, you know, with the neurodevelopmental movement. Like, that is, I always love when I'm working with and a lot of the families I work with are referred by you and Betty and neurodevelopmental movement specialists, and you're doing the brain work and a lot of times therapeutic work and things like that. And then when I can come in and kind of tweak those imbalances biochemically or, you know, genetically, and then they go back to see you guys. And I'm always interested to hear, how did it go? And I'm always so excited because I feel like they really are able to progress. Some of the kids, they get, you know, kind of stuck and sometimes Betty will say, you need to do the biochemical piece before we'll even work, just to get things settled down, and then we'll
Yes.
start, pressing in with the neurodevelopmental work. But it's always so exciting when they have a check-in with their practitioner for neurodevelopmental movement, and they've made tons of progress. It's like, let's keep this momentum going,
It works. When you find it is totally out of the box thinking. It is not covered by insurance other than tested or ran through the doctor's office. That being said, what is paid for this? I don't want to use the word therapy, for this work. What is paid for this work will pale in comparison to what you will pay down the road if the work isn't done.
Yes.
Appointments and other appointments, and trying to figure out how to walk with one arm. It's just so many different. If you do the work now, you'll thank yourself later.
Yes, absolutely.
Now do it as early as possible, such as yourself. Don't wait till your kids are uncontrollable at the age of 13 years old when you can't do anything at that point, because they have their own mind at that point.
Right.
So early, get connected early, as quickly as possible, and just do it. Commit to it for a year.
Yeah.
It will be so worth it. Your kid, you'll be looking at them like, I love you. You're funny, and you'll learn something about yourself. Mom and dad will learn something about each other. You'll have a whole different family in a year if you'll just
Yes. I'm thinking about a family, and they were also working with Nina, and I think they work with Addie Lynn now. And they're the sweetest family. And their little guy had some really big struggles, was nonverbal, and like some of the feedback was so fun, because like the first Christmas after we were working together, she was saying that it was so fun to go to all the Christmas things as a family. It wasn't like, trying to put all these fires out, everything is so hands-on, and somebody's upset, and all these things. And they said it was so much fun. And then her little guy, she had said she was going through the Starbucks drive-through, and she actually shushed him, and he was nonverbal, and she realized, oh no, don't shush. Oh my God, she was realizing, like, oh my gosh, what am I thinking here?
Yes.
This is so adorable. It's so wonderful to hear, and I just think, let's keep going. Let's, and he was doing neurodevelopmental movement as well as he did AIT, and he was doing a lot of the gut work, and just progressing like crazy.
Well, just like Betty, I know you and I will be working a lot more hand in hand in the future as we will continue to grow, because even if they're not a neurodevelopmental client of mine, I still know some gut stuff is there. So guess who's going to get the connection? It needs to be addressed. I'm not an expert and not a doctor. I'm not a psychologist. I have no desire to go to college and get a 4-year degree. So let me just put that out there on the internet right now. Enough reading and enough seeing and enough physical personal experience. The gut is vitally important to everything we do every single day. What we eat, how we sleep, all of it's connected. And these are vital to be put together in a way that if we do have trauma, if we were adopted, if we did come from a home where I can think of one kiddo was adopted and he's from another country, was 3 pounds at the age of 5 months. Thrive, and they're like, oh, it's 5 months, you'll be okay. And the adopted parents don't know. So any adoption journey, before you are signing on the line that child is yours, and you've raised the hand and the judge says this is now your child, guess what? Your next step needs to be to Miss Shawna. Let's work. And then call me, and then we'll do the rest of it. We'll do the fetal patterns, and it totally sets the trajectory of your life with that child different. So much different if you'll do the work early. Unfortunately, the way the system of care is now, go to the doctor, he's got ADHD, let's give him medication, he's not sleeping, let's give him medication, and it just keeps spiraling. And by the time parents connect with us, they're exhausted, they don't know what else, tired.
then like we were talking earlier about institutional care, that is the worst when the kids are really, really dysregulated.
Yep.
Like the more intense the behavior where the parents are even considering like disrupting an adoption or,
Right.
placing them in a group home or something like that. I know that there is so much in the body that's imbalanced, and it's a fight, to get them well, but it's worth that fight because all of those, wonderful characteristics and the joy of parenting that child is just around the corner, and you can't find it if but I understand like the desperation, like it's just awful, but
Yeah.
I love being able to support those families that say we're in kind of a desperate situation, um, and need help, and be able to offer them hope.
Right.
And I don't even care about the hope part and telling them what we could find. Part I want is the progress, the healing of that child so that they can turn into who they were created to be.
Mhm. Absolutely. I love that last statement because that's how I see every individual.
Yeah.
You to be, because you are unique. None of us are the same. And sometimes kids come into the world through no fault of their own with situations that they can't handle because of things that happen. So let's help you get out of your own way so you can continue to heal and do better. And
Yes.
God has a purpose for all of our lives. We're not here by accident. And the sooner we can help somebody heal, the better their life's going to be.
Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely.
So I'm going to put all your contact information on this at the end, but let people know, how can they get in touch with you?
Oh, good question. So the best probably would be just to email me at shawnapulver@gmail.com and just let me know a little bit about, what's going on. If it's an adult, they can just say they need the help, or a spouse, or, older child, just give the age so then I know which paperwork to send. And then from there, we just kind of go back and forth with the forms and then set up the first appointment. Everything is so easy because, I love it for the kids because most of the tests are non-invasive. They're usually stool, urine, hair, saliva, easy to collect. And all of the kits are sent right to your home. You collect the sample, you don't even have to take it to the mail. They'll pick it up for you. And then the lab sends us all the results. And so everything can be done remotely. I work with families all over the world, and even, in other countries. Sometimes there are glitches, but we're able to work around them as far as testing and supplements. I have dispensaries in other countries for supplements. And so it's so easy, the process. Most everyone I see is remote. So we either talk by phone or, do Zoom calls, get all the information, and then we know what tests will be the best, for giving us information. And then we really customize the plan and get them going.
Nice. And I love that it's remote and everything comes home. And you said the keyword non-invasive for the child. So
yes,
traumatized with another doctor appointment. So
yes,
awesome.
I love that. I love the non-invasive. And sometimes they don't even have to talk to me. The parents just give me the information, and we kind of, tweak around what we're able to just look for the benefits.
Love it. That is so awesome. I'm so excited. Guys, if you haven't been able to watch this whole thing, please go back and rewind because there's a lot of good detailed information, a lot of good helps. And Shawna is the girl who can help connect you with your family. So I'm thankful for your time. Thank you for taking 2 hours to tell us more about what you do and your children. I'm so glad they're thriving and doing well.
Oh, thank you.
I can't wait to keep working with you more in the future.
You as well. I'm so grateful for this time to share this information. I hope it helps families out there that are needing help.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care, Renee.